I screamed until my throat tore, but they didn't turn back. Just the crunch of tires, fading. I dragged my useless legs through pine needles until night swallowed me whole. No coat, no food. Just a note pinned to my shirt. He can't walk. Do what you want. When Uncle David found me 12 hours later, I couldn't even speak. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was 38 years later, when Franklin and Marjorie walked into my office like nothing happened, smiling as they sued me for the company I built from scratch. Said it was their money all along. But what they didn't know was, I kept everything. Every receipt, every letter, including the ones Marjorie thought she'd destroyed. And those letters? They're about to speak. Loud. Key moment. They left me to die in the woods, then tried to sue me for surviving. My name is Michael O'Neill, and I'm 45 years old. From my office window at O'Neill Construction, I watch another sunrise paint our newest tower in gold while crews pour foundations below. Uncle David, who rescued and raised me after my parents abandoned me, taught me that success is built one precise measurement at a time. My birth parents, Franklin and Marjorie, left their 7-year-old son with twisted legs alone in the woods. But that broken child grew into a man who builds skylines. Noah Pritchard, my forensic accountant, keeps joking that my documentation rivals federal archives, a habit Uncle David drilled into me along with his contractor's license. Each building permit and bank statement sits filed in perfect order, ready for when shadows from the past come looking for what they threw away. But let me start from the beginning. My fingers drummed over the forensic audit files as I watched Michael through the glass walls of his corner office. Down in the marble-floored lobby, his birth parents had just arrived, Franklin and Marjorie Kincaid. Even from 4 floors up, I could read the practiced contrition in Franklin's stance and the calculated sweep of Marjorie's gaze across our award plaques. You see, Michael had warned me they might surface someday. Success has a smell that draws certain people back, he'd told me last month while we reviewed quarterly statements. Now here they were, right on cue. I grabbed my notepad and headed down. Michael's policy was clear. Document everything. And as his forensic accountant, I had a front-row seat to whatever drama was about to unfold. The lobby's polished stone amplified every footstep as Michael emerged from the elevator. His face was granite smooth, but I caught the slight hesitation in his stride, that old childhood limp showing through for just a moment. Funny how trauma works its way into muscle memory, isn't it? Michael, Marjorie breathed, stepping forward with open arms. You look so accomplished. Her designer blazer whispered against the silk shell beneath. Franklin beamed that real estate agent smile, all teeth and no warmth. Michael kept a careful 4 feet between them. What brings you here after 38 years? His tone was steady, professional, the same voice he used in depositions. We've been following your success in the papers, Franklin said, gesturing at the project photos lining the walls. That medical center downtown? Magnificent work, son. I watched Michael's jaw tighten at that last word. He'd built that center with specialized accessibility features, inspired by his own childhood struggles learning to walk again. We've done a lot of thinking, Marjorie added, her voice thick with manufactured emotion. About the past. About mistakes made. Mistakes? Michael's eyebrow lifted slightly. Is that what we're calling it? Franklin cleared his throat. We were young, struggling. Your Uncle David, he offered to take you, to get you the medical care we couldn't afford. His eyes slid away from Michael's direct stare. We thought it was for the best. I scribbled furiously, noting every word, every micro-expression. Michael had positioned himself so that the massive donor wall behind him was clearly visible. Uncle David's name prominently displayed for his contributions to children's orthopedic care. I appreciate you making the trip, Michael said finally, but I have a meeting in 5 minutes. My assistant can show you out. He turned to me. Noah, would you email legal a summary of this conversation? Include timestamps. Already on it, I assured him. The Kincaids' faces flickered with something surprise, concern, at the mention of legal documentation. After security escorted them out, I followed Michael back to his office. He stood at the window, watching Franklin's luxury sedan idle in the visitor lot. They want something, he said quietly. Money, most likely. Why else show up now? I nodded, adding his observation to my notes. Want me to run preliminary background checks? Please. And Noah? He turned from the window. Flag. Any unusual financial activity from the past 6 months. Something tells me we'll need every detail documented. Later that evening, as I finished typing up the day's summary, I watched Franklin's taillights disappear into traffic. The courier arrived just as I was hitting send. An envelope marked Urgent Legal Notice in bold red letters. Michael took one look at the return address and smiled grimly. Right on schedule, he murmured. Noah, clear your calendar. I think we're about to need those documentation habits of mine. The setting sun caught the etched letters of David O'Neill's name on the donor. I eased the courier envelope onto the glass conference table, positioning it under the LED task lights. Through the frosted walls, I could see Carmen Torres, our senior project manager, pacing with blueprints tucked under her arm. She'd need these financials for the hospital wing bid, but something in my gut said her wait was about to get longer. You know that moment when you just know your whole week's about to implode? Yeah, this was one of those. The envelope's seal cracked with a sound that seemed too loud in the empty room. I'd seen enough legal documents in my career to recognize the formatting before I'd finished the first paragraph. Lawsuit. Civil action. My fingers went cold as I scanned the details. Franklin and Marjorie Kincaid versus Michael O'Neill and O'Neill Construction, I muttered, spreading the papers across the polished surface, claiming misappropriated funds from 1986 through. My voice trailed off as the numbers started jumping out at me. They were alleging Uncle David had stolen money from them decades ago. Significant money. And that Michael's entire company was built on those supposedly stolen funds. The complaint was loaded with specific dates, account numbers, and transaction amounts that made my forensic accountant's brain itch. Too specific. Too neat. I reached for my phone, muscle memory finding Uncle David's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice as steady as always despite the late hour. Noah, I was wondering when this call would come. You knew they'd file? They telegraphed it during that visit. A pause, then, Michael's records? Clean as ever. Every transaction documented, triple backed up. I was already pulling up our digital archives on my laptop, but they're claiming the original seed money was stolen. He finished my sentence with a quiet certainty. They tried this once before, you know, back in '89. Failed then too. There was a rustling sound, like he was settling into his old leather chair. Truth holds, Noah. It always has. That phrase, it was something of a mantra. Between us, born from countless audits and investigations, I felt my shoulders unknot slightly. I'll pull everything. All the way back to the beginning. Good man. And Noah, check the metadata on their supporting documents. People who rewrite history often forget about digital timestamps. I was already typing notes. Meeting with counsel first thing tomorrow. I'll keep you posted. After hanging up, I dove into our records. Physical ledgers. From the early years, Michael insisted on keeping them, filled an entire cabinet. Bank statements. Perfectly organized. Audit trails that could withstand nuclear scrutiny. I'd helped build this system of documentation, and I knew every thread of it. The next hour disappeared into creating a new litigation folder on our secure server. Every file copied, every permission set, everything mirrored to an encrypted backup drive. Standard protocol for what promised to be months of legal archaeology. Carmen knocked softly around midnight, concern etched on her face. Need anything before I head out? Coffee? Your sanity back? I managed a smile. Rain check on both. But hey, that hospital wing bid? Might want to prep alternate funding scenarios. She nodded, understanding immediately. That's why I liked working with Carmen. Sharp as a tack, and never needed things spelled out. Thunder rolled across the construction site outside, nature's timpani punctuating the gravity of the moment. My phone pinged with a calendar invite. Preliminary hearing, 3 weeks out. I stared at the time and date, something cold and determined settling in my chest. The Kincaids wanted to put on a show? Fine. But I'd make damn sure the judge saw the whole production, not just their carefully staged scene. Every number tells a story. That's what I always told my junior accountants. And this story? It was going to be told in full, pristine detail. I closed the folder and watched my screen reflect lightning from the storm outside. Time to get to work. I'd seen my share of conference rooms, but this one felt different. 40 stories up, Manhattan's afternoon traffic hummed beneath us like white noise through the floor-to-ceiling glass. The kind of place designed to make you feel small, where even the water glasses probably cost more than my first car. Jameson and Burke's senior partner, Harrison Wells, sat across from me with that particular smile lawyers get when they think they're holding aces. You know the type. Expensive suit, carefully cultivated gray at the temples, the sort of confidence that comes from never having to count his own money. Mr. Pritchard, he began, sliding a leather portfolio across the polished table. I believe these will interest you. I kept my face neutral as I opened it, but my neck started heating up the moment I saw the first page. Bank statements, account transfers, ledger entries. all dating back to the mid-'80s, all seemingly documenting a pattern of fund diversions from the Kincaids to accounts I recognized as the early foundations of O'Neill construction. As you can see, Wells continued, we've established a clear chain of custody for these records. They've been authenticated by multiple financial institutions. My fingers traced the routing numbers, the transaction dates, the account histories. Everything looked legitimate at first glance. Paper stock, letterhead, even the slight yellowing that comes with age. But something felt off. Maybe it was the way the ink sat on the paper, or how some of the formatting seemed just slightly too modern for documents this old. Interesting timing, I said, keeping my tone conversational. These records surviving all these years, only to surface now. Wells's smile widened fractionally. Sometimes Providence smiles on the righteous, Mr. Pritchard. The Kincaids were quite thorough in preserving their financial history. I bet they were. I made notes on my legal pad, marking specific entries that triggered my forensic radar. The numbers aligned too perfectly with our actual historical ledgers, like someone had worked backwards from known totals. But proving that would take time we apparently didn't have. A young paralegal knocked and entered, handing Wells a court notice. His smirk deepened as he read it. Well, this is fortunate, he said, passing me a copy. The court has granted our motion for an expedited trial calendar. Given the age of the matter and the... He paused delicately. Advanced years of my clients. My stomach tightened as I read the dates. 6 weeks to trial. 6 weeks to analyze 30-year-old records and prove forgery without original documents to compare against. The air in the room suddenly felt thinner. We trust this won't be an issue for a man of your expertise, Wells added, watching me over steepled fingers. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to discuss settlement options. I'll need copies of everything, I said, ignoring the bait. And all supporting documentation showing chain of custody. Of course. He gestured to the paralegal who began arranging files. We're nothing if not thorough. I spent the next hour taking detailed notes, photographing key documents, and trying to ignore the way Wells kept checking his watch like he had better things to do. By the time I finished, my legal pad was covered in action items, each one stamped with that 6-week deadline in my mind's eye. The rain had started again when I left, turning the sidewalk into a mirror of brake lights and neon. I stood under the building's awning, letting the word roll around in my head. Forgery. I knew it in my bones, could almost taste it in the way those documents felt wrong. But knowing and proving were worlds apart, especially with a court calendar breathing down our necks. A taxi splashed through a puddle nearby, and I watched the ripples spread and fade. That's what we needed, to find the ripples these forged documents had left in the real world. Every fake leaves traces. You just have to know where to look. I pulled out my phone to call Michael. We had work to do, and the clock was already ticking. David's kitchen smelled like burnt coffee and determination that evening. I'd spread the lawsuit documents across his worn oak table, the same one where he'd taught me about tracking every penny when I was just starting out. Now those lessons were coming full circle in ways neither of us had expected. These statements, I said, tapping a particularly suspicious bank record, they're good forgeries, but there are inconsistencies in the metadata. Look at how the routing numbers are formatted compared to genuine documents from that era. David leaned forward, his reading glasses catching the overhead light. Show me. I pulled up examples on my laptop, genuine records next to the suspicious ones. See how the spacing is slightly different? Modern banking software uses standardized formats. But back in the 80s, each bank had their own system. These documents have modern formatting disguised to look vintage. Good catch. David nodded, his voice carrying that familiar teacher's pride. But will it be enough? Not on its own. I took a sip of coffee, grimacing at how cold it had gotten. We need to trace every transaction from the ground up. Original bank records, paper archives, interview anyone still around who handled the early accounts. David pushed back from the table and grabbed a fresh legal pad. Then let's map it out. What's first? For the next hour, we built our battle plan. I created a master checklist, breaking down tasks by priority and timeline. Morning hours would go to discovery, digging through archives, calling banks, tracking down old contacts. Afternoons had to stay focused on keeping O'Neill Construction steady through the storm. Speaking of the company, I said, rubbing my eyes, we need to adjust cash flow immediately. No unnecessary expenses until this clears up. I'll talk to the department heads tomorrow. Smart. David's pen scratched across his notepad. They need to understand the stakes without panicking. I nodded, already drafting the memo in my head. Conservative spending, delayed equipment upgrades, maybe pause that new hire in accounting. but keep all current projects fully staffed and supplied. The company's strong, David said, squeezing my shoulder. You built it right. We built it right, I corrected him. And now, we dig. We worked late into the night, sorting through boxes of old receipts and documents David had kept from the early days. My eyes were starting to blur when something caught my attention. A faded logo on a deposit slip from First Regional Bank. Look at this, I said, holding it under the lamp. The watermark's different from the ones in their supposed records, and First Regional still has a branch downtown. With their original vault, David finished, sitting up straighter, where they keep records going back to the 80s. I carefully placed the slip in a document sleeve. I'll call them first thing tomorrow. The clock on David's wall ticked steadily, marking time we couldn't waste. But for the first time since this started, we had a solid lead, something concrete we could chase down. That old bank vault might hold exactly what we needed to expose the truth. David gathered the empty coffee cups while I organized the documents into investigation folders. You should head home, he said. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. I shut off the lamp, listening to that clock tick. 6 weeks suddenly felt very short, but at least now we had a plan. Sometimes that's all you need to turn the tide. That first real thread to pull. As I packed up my laptop, I caught David studying one of the forged documents again. The look on his face reminded me of all those years ago, teaching me how to audit my first set of books. Patient, methodical, leaving no detail unchecked. Some lessons stick with you forever, and sometimes they come back to save you when you need them most. I arrived at First Regional's downtown branch just as they opened, my laptop bag heavy with copied documents and chain of custody forms. The security guard, an older guy with salt and pepper hair, directed me to the archive room in the basement. You know that distinct smell of old paper and dust? It hit me the moment I stepped off the elevator. The archive clerk, Mrs. Henderson, had worked there since the mid-70s. She peered at my request form through thick bifocals. These are quite old records you're after, Mr. Pritchard. Might take some time to locate everything. I understand. I'll help however I can. I set up my workspace at a scratched metal desk while she disappeared into the rows of filing cabinets. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh glare on decades of financial history. Ever gone through old microfilm? It's tedious work, but there's something satisfying about it. Each frame holds a snapshot of the past, waiting to give up its secrets if you know what to look for. I started with account records from 1985, carefully advancing the film and noting every transaction pattern. Found some of those signature cards you asked for, Mrs. Henderson said, setting down a manila folder. And here's the microfilm for safe deposit box registrations. I photographed each document methodically, logging everything in my chain of custody notes. The signature cards were particularly interesting. The ink showed clear aging patterns consistent with their supposed date, but when I compared them to the discovered documents Franklin and Marjorie had produced, something jumped out. Mrs. Henderson, I called. Do you know when the bank switched from manual typewriters to electric ones? She thought for a moment. Must have been late '87. I remember because we all had to take typing classes to adjust to the new keyboards. I nodded, examining the documents more closely. The typeface on Franklin's records claimed to be from '85, but showed characteristics of electric typing. Slightly uneven impression depth, uniform character, spacing. It was subtle, but it was there. I stepped into the hallway to call our lawyer. Jim, I've found something. The typeface analysis alone won't prove forgery, but it's enough to justify bringing in a forensic expert. Can you get someone lined up? He agreed to contact a specialist, and I went back to work. 3 hours in, my eyes were burning from the microfilm reader, but I'd built a solid timeline of actual transactions. The story it told was very different from Franklin's version. Around noon, Mrs. Henderson brought me another box. Last one from that era, she said. Found it in the back corner. This box contained safe deposit box records. I carefully photographed each page, cross-referencing box numbers against our known accounts. Near the bottom of the stack, a familiar number caught my eye. Box 1147. I remembered seeing it referenced in one of Uncle David's old notebooks. I called him from the parking lot, squinting in the bright sunlight. David, I think I found something. Remember box 1147? Should I? His voice was steady, grounding. It shows up in your records from '85. The box is still registered to First Regional, but under a different name now. If there are any original documents left inside, could break this wide open. He finished. Good work, Noah. What else did you find? I leaned against my car, flipping through my notes. The typeface analysis looks promising. And I've got a clear transaction timeline that doesn't match their story at all. I'll have the forensic accountant review everything, but I think we're onto something. Steady as she goes, David said, using his old construction phrase. It made me smile. Some habits never change. I had what I needed for now. Detailed photos, chain of custody documentation, and, most importantly, that safe deposit box number. If anything was still inside, it could be the key to exposing the truth about Franklin and Marjorie's claims. The bank cameras watched me walk to my car. I'd been methodical, documented everything properly. Now it was time to let the experts analyze what I'd found. I pulled out of the parking lot, that box number burning a hole in my pocket. Sometimes the past leaves breadcrumbs, if you know where to look. Right this way, Mr. Pritchard, the vault manager said, leading me through the biometric scanner. The metallic hum of the climate control system filled the air as we descended to the vault level. You know that weight in your chest when you're about to check something crucial? That's what I felt with each step down. I'd spent years analyzing paper trails for a living. But this was different. This wasn't just another client's case. This was personal. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the steel-lined walls as we approached the deposit box section. The manager, Ms. Chen according to her nameplate, moved with practiced efficiency. Her key joined mine in the dual lock system. That satisfying click-click you only get from high-security mechanisms. She pulled drawer 1147 with a certain ceremony, like she knew the weight of the moment. I'll give you some privacy, she said, setting the box on the consultation table. Just press the call button when you're finished. I waited until the door closed behind her. You learn to document everything in this line of work, so I took photos of the sealed box before opening it. Date, time, condition, all noted in my chain of custody log. Then I lifted the lid. Empty. Well, not completely. Dust outlined where envelopes or folders had once rested, like shadows of evidence. Now gone. My stomach dropped, but I kept my professional demeanor. 20 years of forensic accounting teaches you to stay clinical, even when your hands want to shake. Ms. Chen? I pressed the call button. Could I see the access log for this box, please? She returned with a leather-bound register. I flipped to the current month, and there it was. An entry from just 3 days ago. The signature belonged to someone named Marcus Denton, acting as proxy for Franklin Kincaid. Do you maintain surveillance footage of the vault area? I asked, photographing the log pages. For 90 days, she confirmed. But we'd need a court order to release that. I nodded, already drafting a preservation letter in my head. I'll need a copy of your access policies and proxy authorization forms as well. Back at the consultation table, I pulled out my laptop and composed a formal preservation notice to the bank's legal department. Standard language requesting they maintain all records related to Box 1147, including surveillance footage, access logs, and proxy documentation. The timestamp on my email read 10:47 a.m. I called Jim Harrison, our counsel from the vault antechamber. Jim, the box was cleared out 3 days ago. We need to file a motion to compel production of their surveillance footage and access credentials. They got there first, Jim said, frustration evident in his voice. I'll draft the motion today. What else did you find? Dust patterns show multiple items were removed. Got photos and the access log showing their proxy. Bank keeps footage for 90 days. Good work. Document everything and... He paused. Hold on. Just got an email. Tomorrow's witness meeting is canceled. Carter's backing out. I walked to my truck. Each step measured despite the adrenaline still pumping through my system. The steering wheel felt solid under my hands, which had gone white-knuckled without my noticing. Franklin had planned this carefully. Clearing the box, having witnesses go quiet. The scope of his preparation was becoming clear. Sitting there in the bank parking lot, I took slow breaths like they teach you in audit training. Focus on facts, not emotions. A plan had emptied that box, so a plan could refill our case. My phone pinged with the witness cancellation email, another small setback in a growing line. I started the engine, my mind already calculating new approaches. If Franklin thought an empty box would stop a forensic investigation, he had seriously underestimated the power of documentation and metadata. I pulled out my voice recorder and began dictating my notes while everything was fresh. Time to head back to the office and add this piece to our timeline. As a forensic accountant, I've learned that numbers rarely lie, but people do. This morning proved that rule with depressing clarity. I sat at my desk, documentation spread around me like a paper fortress, and dialed the first number on my list. Mrs. Henderson, this is Noah Pritchard. We spoke last week about the early payment records from Kincaid Construction's startup period. There was a pause. Then, I don't recall those transactions. The words came out rehearsed, stilted. Nothing like our preliminary chat where she'd been eager to help. I kept my tone professional. You mentioned specific checks you processed in 2003. We discussed meeting to review the documentation. I'm sorry, Mr. Pritchard. I don't recall those details anymore. That phrase again. I made detailed notes while the conversation was fresh, including timestamps and her exact wording. 20 years in forensics teaches you to document everything, especially sudden changes in witness cooperation. My next call was to Tom Barrett, former accounts payable clerk. Same story. Almost word for word. I don't recall those transactions. The identical phrasing set off every professional alarm I had. This wasn't natural forgetfulness. This was coaching. The vendor call went no better. Jack Morris had handled materials during the company's first major project. Last week he'd been ready to sign an affidavit about payment sources. Now? Listen, Noah, he said, sounding uncomfortable. I've been thinking it over. Those payments were so long ago. I don't recall the specifics anymore. 3 witnesses. Same sudden amnesia. Same exact phrase. I drafted detailed affidavits noting each refusal, including timestamps, dates of previous conversations, and the recurring language patterns. My email to Jim Harrison, our counsel, laid it out clearly. 3 key witnesses have recanted within 24 hours. All use identical don't recall phrasing suggesting coordination. Recommend motion to preserve all communication between witnesses and opposing counsel. The ripple effects were already showing. During lunch, I overheard 2 subcontractors in the break room discussing rumors about the company's tainted beginnings. The whisper campaign was spreading exactly as designed. I called an all-hands meeting for 2 p.m. Standing before our team in the main conference room, I kept my voice steady and factual, the same tone I use when presenting audit findings. I know there are concerns and rumors circulating, I began. Let me be clear. Our financials are solid. All payroll and vendor commitments will be met on schedule. We have the resources and documentation to weather this challenge. The tension in the room eased slightly. I continued. Your jobs are secure. Our projects remain on track. If anyone approaches you with questions about the company's history, direct them to legal. That's what they're there for. By 4 p.m., I had my notes organized and a bag of groceries in my car. Uncle David's health hadn't been great lately, but his mind was sharp as ever. If anyone could help me spot patterns in this witness withdrawal, it would be him. I drove through familiar neighborhoods, mentally rehearsing questions. What connections might we have missed? Who else had access to early records? Why these specific witnesses? The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as I pulled into his driveway. The grocery bag crinkled as I gathered my files. Chicken soup, fresh bread, and the coffee he likes. Small comforts for what promised to be a long strategy session. I was reaching for the doorbell when sirens split the air. Not unusual in itself, but Mrs. Patterson, David's neighbor for 20 years, burst out onto her porch. "Noah!" she shouted, waving frantically. "They just took him! The ambulance! They're heading to Memorial!" The grocery bag slipped from my suddenly numb fingers. Soupkin rolled across the welcome mat as more sirens wailed in the distance. The ambulance rocked as we hit another pothole, monitors jolting, but holding steady. I gripped the metal rail with one hand, David's chart with the other. Watching numbers I understood too well after years of analyzing data patterns. Blood pressure, heart rate, oxygen levels, all forming their own grim spreadsheet. "Stroke protocol in effect," the paramedic announced. Efficient hands moving through a checklist I wished I could audit into better results. Patient showing left side weakness, facial drooping, speech difficulties noted at onset. I'd spent my career finding stories hidden in numbers. Now I watched David's vitals tell a story I didn't want to read. The same dedication to detail that made me effective in forensic accounting felt like a curse. Every fluctuation on those screens spoke volumes. You know how certain sounds stick with you? The steady beep of those monitors would haunt me for months. Beep, beep, beep. Like a metronome counting down the days until our court date. Each signal reminded me of time slipping away, of evidence growing colder, of witnesses staying silent. Later, in the ICU, that beeping continued its merciless rhythm. I sat beside David's bed, staring at my laptop where the investigation task list glowed accusingly. The shame rose like bile. Here I was, still obsessing over ledgers while the man who'd been my rock lay unconscious. The weight of it all crashed down. Without David's guidance, how could I fight this? Our job sites would shudder if the lawsuit succeeded. Hundreds of workers would lose their livelihoods. Suppliers who trusted us would take hits they couldn't afford. All because I couldn't prove what I knew in my gut was true. My finger hovered over the delete key, ready to erase the task list. What was the point? Then I noticed David's wallet on the bedside table, placed there by the nurses along with his other personal effects. Something nagged at my accountant's mind. A detail out of place. I picked up the wallet, methodically checking each compartment like I would an audit file. Behind his license, I found a receipt I'd somehow missed in our earlier searches. Storage unit rental, paid annually, dating back nearly 4 decades. The unit number and facility name were still clearly legible despite the faded thermal paper. The facility was only 15 minutes away. I glanced at David's still form, touched his hand briefly, and headed out as dusk settled over the parking lot. The storage complex looked exactly like the hundreds I'd examined during fraud investigations. Rows of identical metal doors under harsh security lights. My shoes crunched on gravel as I found Unit 247. The key from the receipt still worked. Professional habit made me note that detail for the chain of custody documentation. The door groaned open. Stale air carried that distinctive mix of dust and old paper I knew from countless records rooms. My phone's flashlight beam caught cobwebs, a stack of boxes, and there, a banker's box with familiar handwriting on the label. I'd recognize Marjorie's precise script anywhere after studying those forged documents. But this label was aged, genuine. My hands were steady. As I lifted the box down, evidence handling becomes instinct after enough investigations. The packing tape had yellowed with age. I used my keys to slice it carefully, preserving as much of the original seal as possible. Inside, I found stacks of envelopes, all addressed to David, all in Marjorie's handwriting. The first letter was dated 2 weeks before they left me in those woods. I unfolded it, paper crackling in the silence, and read, "David, please take him." My breath stopped. The words blurred, then sharpened as my professional training kicked in. Document everything. Preserve the evidence. Don't let emotion compromise the chain of custody. But beneath the forensic accountant's discipline, something broke and reformed. This wasn't just evidence of financial fraud. This was proof of a much colder calculation. The rest of that first line stared up at me. "David, please take him. We can't let a broken son ruin our future." I've spent 20 years proving financial fraud through document analysis, but this motel desk had become the most crucial workspace of my career. One lamp cast harsh shadows across letters that revealed a betrayal far colder than creative accounting. You develop certain habits in forensic work. Every document gets its own acid-free sleeve. Every photo needs a clear chain of custody. Every piece of evidence tells its story through details others might miss. The postal marks, the paper stock, the ink consistency, they all speak to authenticity. My hands moved through the familiar rhythm. Photograph, sleeve, log, repeat. But my trained eye caught details that made my stomach clench. Marjorie's handwriting showed no hesitation, no tear stains, no signs of emotional duress. These weren't letters written in desperate circumstances. They were calculated business correspondence. "David, our future cannot carry him." The words were precise, typed quality penmanship. "A broken son will drain everything we've built." Each letter grew more explicit about their plan. They hadn't abandoned their child in panic. They'd orchestrated a transfer of liability. I laid out the timeline on the bed, connecting letters to bank records we'd already gathered. The dates aligned perfectly. 2 weeks before they left me in those woods. Marjorie was already negotiating terms with David. 1 week before, she detailed how they'd explain my disappearance. 3 days before, she confirmed the date. My phone buzzed. Counsel returning my urgent call. I outlined what I'd found, my voice steady with the professional detachment that makes my testimony effective in court. "We need authentication protocol," I said. "Full handwriting analysis, paper, dating, postal mark verification. I've photographed everything with scale markers and preserved the original sorting order." "Smoking gun?" she asked. "Nuclear weapon," I replied. The letters explicitly outline premeditation. They prove the financial timeline we suspected. And they demonstrate that every statement they've made to the court about David stealing me away is provably false. I drafted a detailed memo while waiting for the evidence team, correlating each letter's contents with the financial records we'd been fighting to verify. The story emerged in clinical clarity, not a tragedy of abandonment, but a carefully planned disposal of an inconvenient child. Dawn was breaking when I heard the knock. Our forensics team, right on schedule. We documented the handoff, signed the chain of custody forms, and sealed the evidence case. I watched them drive away with our silver bullet, then headed straight to the hospital. The ICU was quiet at this hour. David's monitors still beeped their steady rhythm, but it no longer felt like a countdown. Now it was more like a metronome keeping time as justice aligned. "We found them," I told his sleeping form. "All the letters Marjorie wrote you. All the evidence of their plan." I touched his hand. "The truth has teeth now." The courthouse steps were already crowded when I arrived, briefcase locked to my wrist by habit. Inside, I could hear my shoes click against marble as I headed for our counsel's table. The evidence case sat ready, every document authenticated, every analysis complete. Years of testifying had taught me the power of calm certainty. As I adjusted my tie and checked the exhibits one final time, I felt that familiar clarity settle in. Numbers don't lie. Documents tell their stories. And evidence, properly preserved, speaks truth to power. The bailiff's voice cut through the murmur. "Calling case number 2023 CV 4891, Franklin and Marjorie Kincaid versus Michael O'Neill." I gripped the handle of the evidence case, ready to open the box that would change everything. I've spent 15 years testifying about financial document analysis, but watching from counsel's table was a new kind of tension. Every forensic expert knows the weight of courtroom moments, how juries lean forward or back, how judges tap their pens, how opposing counsel's objections signal desperation. The handwriting expert, Dr. Matsuda, displayed remarkable composure as she walked the jury through Marjorie's letters. Her laser pointer traced the distinctive loops and pressure points that proved authenticity. You know what I mean? Those tiny details that make each person's writing as unique as a fingerprint. "Note the consistent baseline angle," she explained, highlighting examples on the projection screen. "The terminal strokes, the I-dot placement. These unconscious patterns are extremely difficult to forge consistently across multiple pages written weeks apart." Franklin and Marjorie's lawyer shot up. "Objection! Speculation about timing." "Overruled," Judge Harrison replied. "The witness has established foundation for dating analysis." I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I was cataloging every juror reaction. Juror 4, the retired teacher, nodded at each technical point. Juror 7 flinched when Dr. Matsuda read Marjorie's words about a broken son aloud. These were the moments that could make our case. When my turn came, I approached the stand with the familiar feeling of facts crystallizing into narrative. 15 years of forensic accounting had taught me how to make numbers tell their story. In analyzing the questioned documents provided by the plaintiffs, I began. I identified several anachronistic elements in the metadata. The paper stock shows chemical markers only introduced in manufacturing after 2015, despite purporting to be from 1985. I walked the jury through my findings, pointing out how the forged bank records contained formatting inconsistencies. The font used in these entries wasn't commercially available until 2018. Additionally, the routing numbers follow a structure that wasn't implemented until 2004. Opposing counsel tried to interrupt. "Objection! Goes beyond scope." "Overruled," Judge Harrison said. "Continue, Mr. Pritchard." I pulled up my analysis of the genuine bank records we'd found. These contemporaneous documents show all funds flowing directly from David O'Neill's legitimate accounts. At no point do we see transfers from the plaintiff's claimed sources. The technical details might seem dry to some, but I've learned that juries appreciate precision when money's involved. I could see several taking detailed notes as I explained how the timeline proved the plaintiff's story impossible. "These deposit records," I said, displaying a chart, "align perfectly with the dates in Mrs. Kincaid's letters to David O'Neill. The funds moved exactly when she indicated they would, but into accounts she never had access to." Judge Harrison leaned forward at that point. I recognized that look. When the numbers finally paint the full picture for someone who's been studying fragments. "Thank you, Mr. Pritchard," our counsel said. No further questions. During cross-examination, opposing counsel tried to muddy the waters about document dating methods, but you can't argue with chemical analysis and digital timestamps. I kept my answers clear and concrete, watching Franklin's face grow steadily paler. When Judge Harrison called for an extended recess to review exhibits, the shift in the courtroom energy was palpable. You could feel it. That moment when truth finally breaks through. I gathered my materials carefully, maintaining chain of custody out of professional habit. The evidence case felt solid in my hands as we stepped into the corridor. Reporters clustered immediately, shouting questions about the testimony. I kept walking, my mind already turning to the next phase of analysis we might need. My phone vibrated. A text from the hospital. "David awake. Asking for updates." A good sign, medically and legally. We'd need his testimony to close the final loops if this went to completion. I found a quiet alcove to review my notes, hearing the distant murmur of reporters still hoping for comment. Years of forensic work had taught me that moments like these, when the evidence finally speaks clearly, are best met with patient silence. Let the numbers tell their story. Let the truth sink in. The evidence case sat beside me like an anchor, containing all the proof we'd carefully assembled. Inside, every document was still neatly sleeved, every analysis logged, every connection mapped. I checked my watch, waiting for the judge's clerk to signal our return to court. The bailiff's "all rise" brought us back to attention as Judge Harrison returned. The familiar rustle of movement filled the courtroom, but something in the air felt different. Tighter, more expectant. I'd seen this tension before, when years of financial detective work finally crystallized into undeniable proof. From my seat at the expert witness table, I could see Franklin's attorney fidgeting with his pen. That's always a tell, when lawyers start handling objects instead of maintaining eye contact with the bench. "Be seated," Judge Harrison said, arranging papers before him. "I've reviewed the evidence presented regarding document authenticity, particularly the expert testimony on metadata analysis and chemical dating of materials." He looked directly at Franklin and Marjorie. "The court finds the plaintiffs' submitted financial records fail fundamental authentication requirements under Rule 901. A collective intake of breath swept the gallery. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I felt the satisfaction that comes when numbers tell their truth. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "given Mr. Pritchard's detailed analysis showing deliberate backdating and modification of documents, this court is referring the matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of possible criminal fraud charges." Franklin's jaw clenched visibly. I'd seen that look before, when fraudsters realize their paper trail has betrayed them. Michael's attorney rose smoothly. "Your Honor, given these findings, we move for dismissal with prejudice." "Granted," the judge's gavel crack echoed. "This matter is dismissed with prejudice. Court is adjourned." The gallery erupted in whispers. I began gathering my exhibits, maintaining chain of custody out of habit, when my phone buzzed. A news alert. Someone had leaked Marjorie's letters to the press. The headline read, "Calculated Abandonment. Mother's Letters Reveal Cold-Hearted Plot." As we moved toward the exit, I heard fragments of reporters' questions. Premeditated abandonment? Criminal charges? Other victims? The courthouse steps were crowded with media, their cameras tracking our emergence. Through the press scrum, I caught glimpses of breaking news on their phones. The social fallout was starting. The Westbrook Country Club had suspended Franklin and Marjorie's membership. Their charity board positions were being quietly scrubbed from websites. A state senator's office issued a statement disavowing all connection to the couple. My phone kept buzzing. Banks and suppliers were reaching out, affirming their commitment to Michael's company. Henderson Materials texted, "Full credit terms restored effective immediately. Miller and Sons. Standing credit line reconfirmed." The business world was choosing sides. We pushed through the media crowd, their shouted questions following us. "Mr. Pritchard, how long have you known about the document forgery? Was there a broader pattern of financial fraud? What's your response to the leaked letters?" I kept walking, my evidence case secure against my side. Years of testifying had taught me when silence speaks louder than words. Let the documents tell their story. Let the truth do its work. A text from the hospital lit up my phone. David asking for updates. Time to bring him the news. I turned toward the parking garage, already composing in my head how I'd walk him through the technical details he'd appreciate. "Mr. Pritchard," a reporter thrust a microphone forward. "Given your forensic findings, how long do you think the Kincaids spent planning this fraud?" I kept walking. Behind me, I could hear the media circus continuing, but my mind was already shifting to the next phase, preparing documentation for the criminal investigation that would follow. There would be more analysis needed, more financial archaeology to uncover. The evidence case felt solid in my hands as I reached my car. Inside it, every document told its part of the story. Paper stock that couldn't lie about its age, metadata that revealed its true timeline, letters that exposed calculated cruelty. In my experience, numbers don't care about appearances or social standing. They simply tell the truth, if you know how to listen. I headed toward the hospital, leaving the chaos of cameras and questions behind. The real work, helping the DA's office build their case, was just beginning. But for now, David needed to hear how his decades-old truth had finally come to light. I kept one hand steady under David's elbow as we climbed the courthouse steps. He'd insisted on being here, and though his cane clicked firmly against the granite, I watched his pace with professional attention to detail. Years of analyzing financial patterns had taught me to notice the small tells. Like how he gripped the railing a fraction tighter on each third step. Through the glass doors, a commotion drew my eye to the side entrance. Franklin and Marjorie were trying to slip out unnoticed, but karma had other plans. A cluster of reporters had caught wind of their escape route, and camera lights flared like justice finding its mark. "Noah," David said quietly, "let's pause here a moment." We stood at the top of the steps, and I didn't miss how the morning light caught the silver in his hair. The same silver that had appeared during those long nights reviewing documents with me. Below, the scene unfolded like a ledger coming due. Former country club members stepped directly into Franklin and Marjorie's path, their faces set with the same disgust I'd seen on jury members reading the evidence. I could catch fragments of conversations floating up: complete fraud exposure, deliberate document manipulation, criminal referral pending. Their lawyer hurried past, conspicuously silent when someone shouted about appeal options. I'd seen that look before, when attorneys know there's no mathematical path to victory. David's grip tightened on my arm. "Their legacy," he murmured, watching Franklin and Marjorie try to push through the crowd. "Look how quickly it crumbles." He was right. The double impact of legal defeat and social disgrace was hitting them like compound interest. Headlines had already branded them as calculated abandoners and suspected fraudsters. I'd seen enough financial implosions to recognize the signs. Credit lines would freeze, partnership doors would close, and their carefully curated social capital would vanish faster than misplaced decimal points. "Ready for the next stop?" I asked David. He nodded, and we made our way carefully back to my car. The drive was quiet, but comfortable. The silence of numbers that finally add up correctly. We pulled up to the new development where crews were gathering for the ribbon cutting. Steel rose clean and true against the morning sky, and I could see workers moving with the confidence that comes from knowing their next paycheck was secure. No more whispers about tainted contracts or funding questions. I helped David out of the car, matching his pace as we approached the foundation stone. The Asai engraving stood bold against the granite. "David, the man who carried me out." David's hand trembled slightly as he reached out to touch the letters. I steadied him, feeling the cool stone beneath my own palm. For a moment, we both stood there, and I thought about how different this felt from examining cold financial records. This was solid, permanent, like truth itself. "Remember when we first started the forensic analysis?" I asked him. "You said truth holds." He smiled, the same smile I'd seen when we'd uncovered the first metadata discrepancy in Franklin's forged documents. "Numbers don't lie, Noah. People do." Around us, construction crews were already moving toward their positions. Harnesses clinking, equipment humming. The day's work was beginning without hesitation or doubt. No more worried glances about legal clouds or credit holds. David's fingers traced the engraving one. More time before he turned to face the rising structure. "Abandonment is their legacy," he said quietly, then looked at me. "Resilience is mine." I nodded, understanding the weight of those words. In forensic accounting, we follow the evidence to find the truth. But sometimes, the truth builds something far more lasting than any tower of steel and glass.